It's pretty hard to miss the word woke nowadays, isn't it? It just pops up everywhere. Politics, online debates, even just like everyday conversations.
Absolutely. It's become a real buzzword.
But what does it actually mean right now? That's what we're digging into today. We're looking at an article called Hune, Husu, that translates to Critique of Wokeism by Aidan Javaharian.
Right.
Published May 17th, 2025, tiny update the day before. And this piece, it's part of a bigger series on the left from a specific website, and it really focuses on critiquing the whole woke idea as it's seen in the West.
And what's interesting right off the bat is how the article traces the term's roots. It makes the point that woke isn't, brand new.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the 60s, the 70s, U.S. civil rights, anti-racism movements, being woke then meant being aware. Specifically aware of racial structures, historical inequality, that sort of thing.
Right, exactly. It was about seeing systems that maybe weren't obvious to everyone, and the article points out how that meaning stretched over time.
It really did.
It grew to cover awareness of all kinds of discrimination, gender, ethnicity, even environmental issues, you name it, like a catch-all for social consciousness.
But, and this is really the crux of the article's argument, the author says that this very expansion, maybe well-intentioned kind of, shifted things.
Is it how?
Well, the core idea we're going to explore, based on this critique, is that wokeism transformed.
Right.
From being about awareness, it allegedly became something different, maybe even a restrictive ideology.
Okay, right. So that's the tension. The big question the article poses and what we'll untack is wokeism actually leading us to a fairer society?
Yeah.
Or has it, maybe ironically, turned into something that can also oppress or discriminate? It's definitely a challenging question.
It really is. And just to be super clear for you listening, our aim here isn't to say if wokeism is good or bad. We're not taking sides.
No, definitely rebel.
We're just carefully pulling apart the arguments made in this specific article. Think of it as us giving you a focused look at one critical perspective in this huge debate. We're laying out the analysis for you to think about.
Okay, so let's get into that analysis. The first big characteristic the article identifies is something it calls absolute self-righteousness. What's that about?
According to the article, a core feature of wokeism, from this author's viewpoint, is this really strong conviction among people who identify as woke, a conviction that they and only they have the correct understanding, the moral high ground.
So disagreement isn't just disagreement.
Apparently not. In this view, if someone disagrees, it's not seen as just having a different opinion. It's seen as a moral, even a political flaw in that person.
Wow, that's quite a claim. It sounds like it creates a very sharp divide. If you're not with us on this, you're fundamentally bad.
That's exactly the idea the article puts forward, this stark, us good, others bad way of thinking. And it suggests this quickly leads to what the author terms the demonization of opponents.
Demonization?
Yeah, meaning if you voice a contrary opinion, you're not just mistaken. You get labeled as maybe morally corrupt or pushing some harmful agenda.
And the article suggests this goes beyond just labeling, that there's an idea that dissenters need fixing.
Yes, it claims dissenters are seen as needing, well, re-education.
Yeah.
Or correction. And if they push back, if they resist that correction, then maybe they need to be removed from the discussion entirely. It's a pretty strong assertion about the mindset being described.
It is. And the author makes let's say, a pointed comparison here. They draw a line between this alleged impulse to correct or silence dissent and methods used by some radical Marxist groups or extremist Islamist movements historically.
Oh, wow, okay.
Where ideology had to be pure and opposition was dealt with through re-education or suppression. The article implies wokeism, in this specific analysis, has a similar tendency to shut down opposing views rather than debate them.
Okay, moving to the next point. The article talks about moral violence and exclusion, which sounds kind of contradictory, right? Especially when you hear so much about safe spaces.
That's the paradox the article really wants to highlight. It argues that while woke proponents often talk about creating safe spaces, especially for minorities,
in practice, the author claims people aligned with this ideology can be really intolerant, even of small disagreements within those spaces, and certainly intolerant of views from people they see as outsiders.
So the safe space idea, according to this critique, isn't universal. It's more like safe for us, but not for them.
That's what's being asserted, yes.
Yeah.
The article claims that woke individuals can treat public conversations, even online forums, like their own private property. And they allegedly use social pressure, maybe even fear, to push out people who don't toe the line.
What kind of methods does the article say are used for this exclusion?
It lists a few things. Labeling people to dismiss their arguments, using media campaigns to pressure or silence critics, even threatening people's jobs or academic positions.
Serious stuff.
Yeah, and in extreme cases, it even mentions physical intimidation or violence against opponents. The goal, according to this critique, is to make spaces safe only for the insiders, those fully on board, while anyone else is deemed unsafe and needs to be ostracized.
Okay. The next theme is censorship in the name of justice. This sounds like it builds on that exclusion idea, almost like trying to purify the public square.
It does tie in. The article argues that despite all the talk about diversity, wokeism in practice acts more like a purification project. The goal, this analysis suggests, is to scrub society clean of anything perceived as discriminatory or linked to historical injustice.
And how does it suggest this purification happens? By removing things.
Exactly. The article gets specific here. It mentions targeting statues, old movies, classic books, certain words or terms, songs, even parts of language itself that are seen as carrying some baggage from historical inequality.
So anything potentially problematic from the past needs to go.
That's the reasoning presented in the critique. If it carries the scent of past injustice, it must be removed or altered.
That's a huge undertaking. And the article compares this to other forms of censorship, too.
It does. It explicitly compares it to ideological censorship seen in totalitarian regimes. The key distinction made is that here, the justification is justice, but the result, the author argues, is the same. The erosion of freedom, the elimination of certain viewpoints or cultural items.
Then the focus shifts a bit to tribalism of identity and how this supposedly causes a collapse of social solidarity. How does the author frame that?
The argument here is that wokeism, as analyzed in this piece, tends to divide people primarily based on their identity group, gender, race, sexual orientation, where they're from, and so on.
Instead of uniting them around shared ideas or maybe individual merit?
Precisely. Rather than shared values or achievements, identity becomes the main sorting mechanism. And the article claims this doesn't actually lead to more understanding between groups.
No. What does it lead to, according to the article?
It suggests it leads to endless tribal wars. Different identity groups allegedly start seeing themselves primarily as victims, blaming other groups for their problems or disadvantages. You could imagine it like teams constantly pointing fingers at each other instead of playing the same game.
And the result of this tribalism?
The article claims it seriously damages social solidarity.
Yeah.
You know, that feeling of being in it together, supporting each other as a society. It fosters this kind of cold civil war atmosphere where dialogue breaks down into competition for resources or recognition between these identity tribes.
Okay, this next point is interesting. Reverse inequality. The article claims this is a practical outcome of wokeism. What does the author mean by that?
So the author argues that one tangible result they see from wokeism is the creation of new inequalities, but in reverse. For example, prioritizing someone's identity over, say, their skills or qualifications for a job or a place at university.
Like quotas, things like that.
Yeah, the article specifically brings up the normalization of quotas based on race, gender, sexual orientation. And it also points to what it sees as double standards, applying rules differently depending on someone's identity group.
Can you give the example it uses?
It mentions how the same physical interaction, maybe a touch, could be treated very differently depending on the genders of the people involved.
And the article's take on this overall, this idea of reverse inequality.
The author sees it as undermining actual justice. The principle of treating everyone the same under the rules gets sacrificed, they argue, for something that looks more like revenge, or an attempt to fix past wrongs by creating new imbalances. Judging people based on group identity, even with good intentions, creates new unfairness, is the argument.
Right. Then the article turns to art and culture with the heading, The Censored Art, the Death of Imagination in the Age of Sensitivity. Sounds like a critique of creative limits.
Exactly. The argument is that art and culture are taking a big hit from wokeism. The focus is on how acting, which is all about pretending to be someone else, right, is allegedly now being judged based on the actor's real identity.
What examples does it give?
Well, it points to the idea that's become more common. Only a transgender person can play a transgender role, or only a Latino actor should play a Latino character, that kind of direct identity matching.
And the article sees this as a problem for art itself.
Definitely. The author argues it stifles creativity, limits imagination. Instead of art being this place to explore different lives, build empathy, have dialogue, it risks becoming just a platform for promoting identity politics, reinforcing narratives based purely on who gets to tell the story.
Okay, then there's this really striking phrase, Victim-playing aristocrats, the new rulers in the guise of oppression. What's behind that title?
It's a provocative concept. The author suggests a new social class is emerging within wokeism. They call them victim-playing aristocrats, meaning people who publicly frame themselves as victims of oppression and marginalization, but who, according to the article, actually hold significant power in media, universities, cultural institutions, maybe even economically.
So the idea is they use the language of victimhood to gain and keep power.
That's the argument, basically. The author suggests they constantly bring up historical wrongs, are never really satisfied by reforms, and that their real goal isn't necessarily ending discrimination, but fundamentally changing who holds power in society.
And there's another comparison to Marxist ideas here, too.
Yes, the article explicitly links it to Marxist class struggle theory. Just like Marx talked about the proletariat overthrowing the bourgeoisie, this analysis suggests wokeism aims to flip the power structure, so that those identified as victims become the new dominant group.
Okay, bringing it all together, the article finishes with critiquing wokeism, a defense of freedom and a moral duty. It seems to frame criticism in a very specific way.
It does. The conclusion really emphasizes that criticizing wokeism, in the author's view, isn't about being against justice. It's framed as defending essential things like freedom of speech, open discussion, rationality, just peaceful coexistence, really, and what the author sees as an increasingly extreme climate.
And the final sort of punchline.
The article wraps up by saying something like, wokeism, with all its beautiful slogans, is in practice a totalitarian project that wants to destroy morality with the tools of morality. It stresses that defending free expression and dissent isn't opposed to justice, it's necessary for it. The big warning is that if a society only allows one voice, even a supposedly virtuous one, it risks becoming a new kind of oppression itself.
Wow. Okay, so to quickly run through the main points of this critique again, this article argues wokeism is characterized by absolute self-righteousness, uses moral violence and exclusion, engages in censorship for justice, creates identity tribes that fracture society, leads to reverse inequalities, stifles art, and allows for the rise of victim-playing aristocrats. And the author concludes that critiquing this is vital for defending freedom against a potentially totalitarian trend.
Exactly. And for you, listening, grappling with this specific critique gives you a really useful framework for understanding one major viewpoint on this whole complex phenomenon. It's a detailed argument to consider as you encounter these ideas out in the world.
Yeah, it definitely gives you a lot to think about. As you mull over these arguments, maybe consider what are the risks when any movement believes it has the absolute moral truth? And, how do we balance that vital push for justice and equality with protecting open debate, different viewpoints, and just freedom of thought? It's a tough balance to strike.